It's the month of February in the year 2014, and this audio is being recorded in Tyler, Texas, USA. From experiences we have had here at Shamarai Hamashal, we're creating a series of short videos that explain essential teachings that will help you understand our interpretations of the Hebrew text. This one is on what is commonly referred to as interlinear translation. Many people read the Bible using standard translations in their native language. This will not allow the reader to understand the true underlying meaning unless they use an interlinear translation method. This may be unfamiliar to some, so we have made this video to help you understand how it works. It's important to remember that Bible interpretation is not your responsibility, but making sure you get the right interpretation is your responsibility. In this presentation, we will show you how an interlinear translation is constructed so you can check the work of interpreters, or you can do your own in-depth study of a particular verse or passage. We are sometimes asked, how do you translate Hebrew into English? Another question we often hear is, what translation is the most accurate? Interpretation is a skill that God provides to those He chooses to endow with that skill. Everyone has a God-provided skill, and most of them are different than interpretation. Interpretation is the translation from one language to another and its meaning. An interlinear translation is the best form of translation for our purpose, and we'll explain why in a few minutes. You're looking at the English translation of the first part of Exodus chapter 33 verse 8. It's the King James Version. Of course, there are many other English translations, but it doesn't really matter much which one you choose. You can never exactly represent something in one language in another language. So English can never yield an exact translation of Hebrew. In fact, Old Hebrew in the Bible is different than modern Hebrew. This is the Hebrew text that the King James Version translators have translated into English. The original Hebrew text appeared something like what you see here. There are only consonants and no vowels. Vowels were added later by the Masoretes. For English readers, the primary difficulty is that Hebrew reads from right to left. It's difficult to teach yourself to read in the other direction for many people. There just isn't any easy way to do it, except train yourself to get used to the idea. This is the Masoretic text with their interpretation of the punctuation. This is how vowels are added to the consonants. There are 5 Hebrew words in this part of the Hebrew text. I have marked each one of them in the order that they are read. There are 12 words in the English translation. So the first thing you note is that the English translation has added 7 words more than the Hebrew words. Now let's take the Hebrew text and add the interlinear translation into English for each Hebrew word. An interlinear translation is available at various places on the internet. I typically use Kohlenberger's book on the Hebrew-English interlinear translation of the Old Testament. The first word is the common Hebrew verb to be. It can be translated, and he was. It takes 3 English words to translate this Hebrew word into English. So that you're not confused, each English word is joined by a dash that shows that it's the transliteration of one Hebrew word. This is translated in English by the King James Version translators as, "and it came to pass." The second interlinear translation is "like to go." The word "like" is denoted by the Hebrew consonant kaf. The interlinear translators typically translate this consonant as "when." English translators will try to smooth the translation so that it sounds right to English readers. The third word is Moses. So the King James Version of the second and third Hebrew words is "when Moses went out." You can see that the order of the Hebrew words and the English words are different. We shall see that this is an essential difference And this is why using an interlinear translation is necessary to see the language structure of the Hebrew. This is lost in English translation. The fourth word is to, and the fifth word is the tent. The Hebrew consonant he denotes the definite article the. Most important is that the Hebrew word for tent is not the same as the Hebrew word for tabernacle. Unfortunately, the King James Version confuses tent and tabernacle frequently. It's essential to interpretation to understand whether the word is tent or tabernacle. Now let's look at the definition of each Hebrew word. This is an extract from Blue Letter Bible's website. It's a very good resource for completing the last part of the interlinear translation. One of the columns is the Strong's number. I've circled it in purple. At Blue Letter Bible's website, if you click on the Strong's number, it gives a definition of each Hebrew word by Hebraist Wilhelm Gesenius. Blue Letter Bible's definition also has an audio of the word pronounced in Hebrew by one of the translators, so you can hear what it would sound like if it was spoken. This is useful for important words that you will frequently encounter in the Pentateuch, like nephesh, soul, or ruach, spirit. When you have the Strong's number, you can use any other concordance or lexicon available to investigate the definition of the word. Two other frequently used references are Strong's Concordance and Brown Driver Briggs's lexicon. I have circled the verb yatzah, to break forth, in red. If you click on the button Parse, it will tell you the form of the verb. This is important because Hebrew verb forms will often yield different meanings. This is the final interlinear translation of Hebrew to English. Hebrew words have the Strong's number in square brackets so that anyone can look up the definition and prove to themselves that the interlinear translation is accurate. The key is transparency and openness, so that the reader can know he is reading it just as the Hebrew intends it to be understood. I have made the infinitive verb like to break forth instead of like to go to sacrifice a smooth reading in English for a more accurate and consistent translation with as little bias as possible. The Hebrew word for to does not have a Strong's number because it's so common that it's not listed. Interlinear translations are essential because the Pentateuch is structured words. Hebrew words are used to convey a meaning in the structured format that makes it essential to preserve the Hebrew word structure in order to capture the true meaning the writer intends the reader to understand. English translations cannot accomplish the same thing unless they are interlinear translations. The Hebrew in the Bible is meant to be translated into other languages. It's not just intended for Hebrew readers and speakers. The interlinear translation accomplishes this goal. Here's why it's so essential to preserve the Hebrew word structure when you interpret the Pentateuch. This is a figure from Jacob Milgram's commentary on the book of Numbers. All of the books of the Bible, from Genesis to Joshua, are part of a large integrated word structure. Genesis begins the structure, Joshua ends the structure. On the bottom of the figure, you see sections of the first 6 books of the Bible marked with letters A, B, and so on. Their reflection is marked by A primed, B primed, C prime, and so on. This reflection is like a mirror. The closest text is G and G prime. The farthest text is A and A prime. An interlinear translation preserves the Hebrew word structure so that you can interpret the meaning as it was intended by the writer. The part of the text marked X is right at the center. In Hebrew writing, this is the theme of the structure. It's very important. This theme is right at the Exodus chapter 33 that we looked at earlier. This is an illustration from one of Shammai Hamashal's presentations. We're zooming in on the text at the center of the Hebrew word structure from Genesis to Joshua. The reflections occur at smaller scales of text. For example, Exodus chapter 31 verses 12 to 18 talk about Sabbath laws, and so does Exodus chapter 35 verses 1 to 3. This structural characteristic carries on down to parts of verses and sometimes even a single word. The Hebrew text I have marked D is Exodus chapter 33 verses 7 to 11. They are at the very center of all of the Hebrew text of the first 6 books of the Bible. It's the description of the tent of meeting. This tent of meeting becomes an important part of the tabernacle. You cannot interpret the Hebrew text without preserving the word structures. An interlinear translation allows an interpreter to do that. If someone presents an interpretation that does not preserve the Hebrew word structure, their interpretation is bound to be incorrect. I hope this short presentation explains why we at Shammai Hamashal use interlinear translations to interpret the Bible. We hope this short video will help you understand how to create an interlinear translation from Hebrew to English. If you would like more information, you can go to the website listed here and text us your request.